Hey guys, tonight we're going to follow a quiet little adventure that begins with a dog. Not just any dog, but a stray with a blue cloth tied around its neck like it had somewhere important to be. Picture this. The sky is warm and milky cicadas humming in the trees, and the air smells like damp dust and pencil shavings. You're sitting on the front steps of an old elementary school with your backpack still warm against your back. You might not have experienced this before, but sometimes animals show up in our lives like they know something we don't. They stand there just watching like they're waiting for us to catch up. If you enjoy stories like these, quiet, cozy, and full of little mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe to Little Diary for Sleep. Every week I'll bring you another soft-spoken memory to drift off to. All right, now let's get into today's diary entry. It was the start of summer, and I was about 12. I lived in a small rural town with dirt roads humming wires overhead, and neighbors who always swept their front steps in the morning. School had just ended for the day, and like always, I hung around a bit after the final bell, waiting for the crowd to thin. I liked walking home alone. It gave me time to imagine things. But that day, someone else was waiting with me. The dog stood across the dirt road from the school gate right next to the banyan tree with roots as thick as my legs. Its fur was a patchy mix of browns and creams, like someone had tried to paint a beagle from memory. What stood out most was the cloth tied around its neck, a piece of blue fabric faded at the edges, tied into a neat little knot. It wasn't panting, wasn't barking, just standing, watching. I stared back. Maybe it belonged to someone nearby, but no one came. The street was quiet except for the squeaky bicycle of the tofu vendor going by. The dog looked at me again and then turned around slowly, padding off down the road. I don't know why I followed it. I wasn't exactly the adventurous type, but there was something about the way it moved, like it had a purpose, like it wasn't just wandering, but leading. It glanced back every now and then to check if I was keeping up. I passed the pharmacy, the sugarcane stand, and the familiar turn to my street, but the dog kept going, and so did I. We reached the old barber shop near the edge of town. It had been closed for as long as I could remember. The paint on the shutters had peeled away, revealing gray wood beneath, and someone had drawn a mustache on the glass with white chalk years ago. Just beside it, tucked between two walls that leaned a little too close, was an alley. Narrow and dark, the kind of place most kids weren't allowed to go. My mom always said snakes and trash piles. That's all that's back there. But the dog squeezed into it without hesitation. I hesitated for only a second. Then I ducked under a low pipe and stepped in. It smelled like wet bricks and old leaves. The walls were covered in faded posters, one for a missing bicycle, another advertising a magic show from years ago. Moss grew between the cracks on the ground. The further I went, the cooler the air became, like I was walking out of summer and into something older. I called softly, "Hey, doggy, where'd you go?" No answer. Just the sound of my own footsteps and a quiet breeze that didn't seem to come from anywhere. But then I saw the end of a tail disappear around another corner. I sped up, turned the corner, and found myself in front of something I hadn't expected at all. There was a crumbling stone wall overgrown with ivy surrounding the back of what looked like an old temple. The alley had somehow led me here. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the cicadas had stopped singing. And then I saw the dog again, sitting right at the edge of the wall. There was a hole in the stone, small, but just big enough to crawl through if you really wanted to. The dog turned to look at me one more time. Its eyes were calm, maybe even a little tired, but they seemed to say, "Come on, just a little further." I took a deep breath, dropped my bag beside the wall, and crawled through the gap. My hands scraped against old stone and dry leaves. When I stood up on the other side, brushing the dust off my knees, I realized something strange. Everything beyond the wall felt untouched, like no one had been here in years. The dog was already walking again, nose low to the ground, tail swaying, and I, for reasons I still don't fully understand, followed without a word. The dog led me past the back of the temple, where moss-covered statues peeked out from tangled vines and cracked stone steps, sank beneath clusters of wild grass. The air smelled like old incense and rain-soaked wood. I paused for a moment and looked up at the tiled roof, faded and chipped, but still holding its shape, like it was stubborn about staying put, even though time kept tugging at it. I didn't see the dog for a second and panic gripped me a little. But then I caught sight of its tail just beyond a line of sagging laundry poles and an abandoned broom leaning against the wall. It slipped around another corner and I jogged to keep up. That's when I noticed the alley shift again. Not in a magical way, but in the way certain places feel like they've changed their minds about being ordinary. The path grew thinner, the concrete cracked into old earth, and soon the walls fell away altogether, opening into a clearing I'd never seen before. At first I thought it was just a wide yard, but the ground was uneven and saplings sprouted at odd angles. Shards of clay pots poked up through the dirt, half buried like bones. In the middle of it all stood a single tree, a guava tree full and heavy, with small green fruit, some of which had fallen and burst open in the dirt. The dog paused beside it, sniffed one of the fruits, then looked up at me like, "Still with me?" Beyond the tree, I saw the fence, or what was left of it. Wooden slats leaned like drunken teeth, tied together in places with wire and fraying rope. One section had collapsed completely, leaving a gap between two fence posts where an old rusted wheelbarrow had been jammed in to keep anything bigger than a raccoon from wandering through. The dog didn't hesitate. It slipped easily around the wheelbarrow and disappeared into whatever lay beyond. I hesitated. This part of town was completely unfamiliar to me. I'd lived here my whole life and had never even heard of an orchard nearby, at least not one this hidden. The fact that no one had mentioned it before made it feel like I'd crossed into a memory that didn't belong to me. But I was too curious to turn back, so I followed. The moment I stepped past the broken fence, it felt like the air changed. Not colder, not warmer, just quieter. As if everything beyond the boundary belonged to a different kind of time. A time where people whispered instead of shouted, and the wind moved like it was remembering something. I walked carefully, brushing past tall grass and tangled vines ducking under low-hanging branches. Then just like that, the trees parted. And I found myself standing in a place that didn't look real, an orchard. But not like the ones in books with neat rows and trimmed hedges. This one was wild. The trees were crooked and tall, their trunks split and knotted, and their branches hanging low, with fruit pears maybe or persimmons. Some I didn't even recognize. Everywhere I looked, nature had reclaimed everything. Old wooden ladders leaned against tree trunks half-eaten by moss. A bicycle wheel lay under a bed of ivy, its spokes like the ribs of some strange animal. There was a small shack made of corrugated metal in the distance, its roof caved in by vines. And in the middle of all this wildness, the dog sat on its haunches, staring up at a house on a low hill. It was a small house made of wood and stone, with a tiled roof and a wide porch. Nothing too strange except that it didn't have a front door. Just an open frame like someone had carefully removed it and never put it back. I walked slowly toward the dog, careful not to step on any fallen fruit. The soft squish beneath my shoes made a wet sort of hush that filled the space between us. The dog stood up, shook itself once, then trotted up the steps of the porch and disappeared inside the house without so much as a bark. I stood at the bottom of the steps and looked around. No sign of people, no electric wires, no buzzing sounds of radios or engines, just trees whined and the creak of wood settling into itself. I climbed the steps. The floorboards of the porch were warped but strong, and as I stood at the entrance peering into the dark space beyond, I felt a chill that wasn't quite fear, more like recognition. Like I'd been here before, but in a dream I'd forgotten until just now. Inside it was dim. Sunlight filtered through gaps in the walls, striping the floor in golden shadow. There was a low table, an empty teacup, and a woven mat that looked recently used. A faint smell of roasted chestnuts lingered in the air. The dog sat calmly by the far wall, tail curled around its legs as if it belonged there, as if it had always belonged there. And maybe, just maybe it had. The house was silent in the way a place becomes when it's been waiting a long time. Dust danced in the light that slanted through the gaps in the wooden walls. The boards creaked under my feet, not out of protest, but like they were murmuring in a language I couldn't quite understand. I took another step inside. The air was cooler here, but dry, like the place had somehow kept the weather out for years, maybe decades. The smell was a mixture of old wood, dried herbs, and something a little sweeter, like fruit past its ripeness. The dog didn't move. It watched me with calm, steady eyes, sitting near what looked like a cabinet. I walked toward it slowly, trying not to make noise, though my every step still groaned through the floor. The furniture was simple: a table with one leg slightly shorter than the others, a faded cushion in the corner, and that odd little cabinet carved with vines and cranes. There was no dust on the handle. I opened it without thinking. Inside were three items: a cracked porcelain cup, a spool of faded red thread, and a folded piece of paper. I left the cup and thread untouched, but gently unfolded the paper. It was a child's drawing. Rough lines in crayon, blue-red, and yellow on brown paper. It showed a boy with spiky hair standing next to a dog. The dog looked just like the one in front of me, complete with a blue cloth around its neck. Behind them was an orchard almost identical to the one I had just walked through. Big looping trees, fruit hanging in exaggerated shapes, and a house on a hill. The hill had no door drawn on it, just a dark rectangle where the entrance should be. I glanced at the dog. It didn't move. Something about the drawing made me feel paused, like I'd opened a window into someone else's afternoon, a moment trapped and folded away like a memory inside a drawer. Then I heard a sound. Not loud, just the gentle scrape of something dragging across the wooden porch outside. I turned. Through the open doorway, past the shaded entryway, and into the orchard again, I saw a shape moving through the trees. Slow, purposeful, not threatening but solid enough to be real. A man, tall with a wide hat and clothes the color of bark. He moved with the stiff, certain rhythm of someone who had done the same walk for years. In one hand, he held a basket filled with something I couldn't quite make out, perhaps guavas or maybe dried leaves. He wasn't in a hurry, and he didn't look up. The dog stood. It padded quietly past me and out the door again, tail wagging once. I followed more out of instinct than decision. As I stepped onto the porch again, the man was already placing the basket beneath the guava tree. Then, without looking in my direction, he reached into his pocket and tossed something to the dog. A small piece of dried meat. The dog caught it midair and sat down to chew. The man didn't say a word, not to the dog, not to me. Just turned and began walking back the way he came. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Somehow, words felt too heavy for this place. Instead, I followed the dog. It sniffed around the base of the tree and wandered into the taller grass near the fence. I stayed close the orchard, feeling less like a place and more like a breath held just beneath the surface of the world. We passed a rusted wheelbarrow, now tipped over and half swallowed by ivy. I stopped to look inside and saw a pair of children's shoes covered in dust but perfectly placed side by side, as if someone had taken them off before running barefoot through the trees. I looked around again. The orchard had the strange stillness of a place abandoned too slowly, not left all at once like in a storm, but faded away one footprint at a time. In the distance, I spotted another drawing pinned to a tree. I approached it carefully. It was held in place by an old nail almost swallowed by the bark. This drawing was newer, or at least not as weathered. It showed the same boy and the same dog, but this time they were sitting at the base of the tree sharing what looked like a sandwich. The boy was smiling wide. The dog's tail was drawn mid-wag. The signature at the bottom just read, "To my best friend." A soft breeze passed through the orchard, then brushing against the back of my neck like a sigh. I turned slowly, half expecting to see the boy from the drawing or the old man again. But the orchard was empty except for me, the dog, and the faint scent of fallen fruit. The dog looked at me again, just for a moment. Then it started walking, this time toward the far edge of the orchard, where a small path disappeared into a wall of bamboo. I didn't hesitate this time. I followed. The bamboo grove whispered as we entered. Each stalk shifted gently, tapping against its neighbor like wooden wind chimes. The light changed here. It filtered through the green in soft, dappled fragments, and I had to squint to see the path ahead. It wasn't really a path, just a place where the bamboo had grown less densely, as if something or someone had come through often enough to bend the stems slightly outward. The dog walked confidently, tail low, but wagging faintly like it was pleased I was still behind it. I was starting to realize this wasn't just about a stray dog anymore. There was a rhythm to everything: the drawings, the absence of sound, even the way the breeze only came through when I noticed something. It felt like I'd stepped out of the ticking world and into something slower, stitched together, from lost afternoons and forgotten places. Eventually, the bamboo parted, and I stepped out into a sunlit clearing. The orchard stretched wide again, but different from before. Here, the trees were older, their trunks thicker, their branches weighed down by dense clusters of golden fruit. Some fruit had fallen bursting open on the ground, with a sugary scent that made the air feel thick and dreamy. Bees moved lazily from bloom to bloom. Insects buzzed like soft static in the distance. At the center of it all was a wide stump, flat and round, like it had once been used as a table. The dog climbed onto it, circled once, and lay down with its paws hanging slightly off the edge. I stood beside it, unsure what to do. I sat down on the grass. It was warm, not scratchy or damp, but soft, almost too soft for the wild. I leaned back on my elbows and stared at the sky, where clouds drifted by like peeled paint floating in water. I didn't know how long I lay there. Time thinned itself out in that place. Seconds folded into minutes without warning, and somewhere in between I must have closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the dog was gone. Panic flared up in my chest like a hiccup I couldn't swallow. I stood up quickly and spun around. No paw prints, no movement, but there was something else. A low rumble, barely audible, like a voice talking behind a closed door. I followed it. Not with any plan, just moving in the direction the sound seemed to throb from. The trees grew thicker again, and I had to push branches out of the way. Some had thorns that grazed my arms. I ducked under a twisted limb and stepped into a part of the orchard that felt cold or shaded. The air smelled different, less sweet, more earthy, like old wood and wet stone. That's when I saw it. Another house, much smaller than the first and rounder, in shape almost like a hut. It had a stone base and a wooden top with a single window, too high for me to see through. The door this one had a door was slightly ajar. I approached slowly. The rumbles had stopped, replaced now by a steady tap, 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 like someone stirring something in a bowl. I pushed the door open. The inside was dim and circular. Shelves curved, with the walls holding jars filled with dried fruit-folded paper and bundles of herbs tied with string. In the center of the room was a low table, and behind it sat a man. His back was straight, and his long hair was tied back in a loose cord. He wore a gray tunic, wrinkled and stained, with the kind of marks that only come from years of use. He was stirring something in a clay bowl. He didn't look up. I took a hesitant step inside. The dog was there, curled in the corner on a faded mat, licking its paws like nothing was strange. The man finally spoke soft, low, and deliberate. "She used to draw you." I blinked. "I'm sorry," I asked, but my voice came out barely more than a whisper. "She drew everything," he said. "The orchard, the dog, the ladder that always fell over, the door that never closed. She said if she could draw it, she could keep it." I didn't know what to say. The man hadn't even looked at me yet. His hands moved slowly, rhythmically, like stirring kept time from unraveling. He reached into a wooden box beside him and pulled out another drawing. He handed it to me without meeting my eyes. It was older than the others, edges curled, colors faded. It showed a girl maybe 8 or 9, with a wide smile and a red ribbon in her hair. She was holding a book and sitting beneath the guava tree. The dog was beside her, looking up. "She left before she finished this one," the man murmured. There was silence after that. A long, heavy pause filled with the hum of the world outside and the tiny sounds of the house breathing. I didn't ask who she was. I didn't have to. The man finally looked at me. His eyes were gentle, like old river stones, smoothed over by years. "Take a drawing when you leave," he said. "That way it won't be forgotten." The dog stood stretched and trotted back to the doorway, waiting for me like always. I nodded once, tucked the drawing carefully into my shirt, and followed it out. We left the roundhouse behind, slipping once more into the soft, rustling arms of the orchard. The trees swayed gently, even though there was no wind, as if nodding to some music I couldn't hear. I stayed quiet, my steps slow and deliberate. The drawing inside my shirt felt warm against my chest, warmer than it had any right to be. The dog led again. It didn't rush, just walked at a pace that said, "We're not done yet." I followed, weaving through the fruit-heavy trees and stepping carefully over the twisted roots that knuckled up from the ground like sleeping hands. The path began to rise. It wasn't steep, just steady, like climbing the back of something ancient and still breathing. I realized we were heading toward the house on the hill again, the one with no door. Only now I saw it from a different angle. The porch looked the same, The tiles along the roof still broken in the exact same spots, but the space around it felt changed, as if time had passed even though only an hour or two had gone by. The dog stopped at the foot of the porch and sat. I hesitated, then climbed the steps and peeked inside, and I saw them. Not clearly, like ghosts lit by memory rather than light. Two figures sat at the table, the girl from the drawings and a boy just a bit older than me. They weren't talking, just sitting. Their hands rested on the wood between them, fingers almost touching. I blinked, they were gone. The room was empty again, just the soft smell of old herbs and something roasted a long time ago. The same teacup still sat on the table, the cushion still slightly indented. Nothing had moved, and yet everything had shifted. The dog didn't go in this time. It stayed on the porch, watching the orchard with an expression I couldn't quite read. I sat down on the step beside it. The orchard stretched below us like a painting no one had finished. There were places where trees grew thick and tangled, spots where the fruit had fallen and rotted sweetly into the earth, and sections where the grass stood tall, like it had never been walked through. It was beautiful, yes, but in the way a memory's beautiful. Not quite real, not quite present. "You lived here once, didn't you?" I asked quietly, looking at the dog. It didn't answer, just let out a long sigh and rested its chin on its paws. I pulled the drawing from my shirt and held it up to the light. The girl's smile seemed brighter than I remembered. The dog in the picture looked almost smug, the kind of expression a dog wears when it knows it's part of something special. I folded it gently and tucked it back away. From my new perch on the porch, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a trail barely visible winding through the orchard beyond the house. A line of stones half sunken into the soil led from the edge of the hill and disappeared behind a dense curtain of trees. The dog stood. Without hesitation, it began walking toward the trail. So I followed again. The stone path clicked underfoot as we moved. Some of the stones had initials scratched into them, while others were blank, worn smooth by time and weather. As we walked, I saw bits of the orchard I hadn't noticed before. A rusted bicycle leaned against a tree, with vines wrapped lovingly around its frame. A scarecrow with a hat tilted sideways stood guard over a patch of overgrown vegetables. There was even a wind chime made of spoons gently clinking in the breeze. And then we came to the fence, not the broken one I'd entered through earlier. This was a proper gate, arched and wooden, with a carved design of leaves spiraling along the top. The gate hung open, swinging slightly even though the wind had stopped. Beyond it was a small clearing, a circle of earth packed flat, surrounded by fruit trees that stood straighter than the rest. In the center was a stone slab. A name was etched into it, but the moss and time had taken most of the letters. I could only make out a few: M.I. and Yucca. The dog walked forward and sat beside it. For a long time we didn't move. There were no ghosts here, no whispers, just the kind of silence that holds things safe, the kind that doesn't need explaining. I crouched down and placed the folded drawing gently on the stone. It didn't flutter in the wind. The dog stood, gave one small huff of breath, and turned around. It was time to go. We walked back slowly past the wind chime, the scarecrow, and the bicycle, past the porch where memories once sat, through the orchard where time never seemed to run in a straight line, back to the place where I had first followed the dog through the fence. But the fence was whole now. No broken slats, no gap to crawl through. Just a quiet, tall fence with ivy growing thick and green across its boards. I turned to the dog. It sat looking at me one last time. Then it turned and padded away into the trees, into the orchard, and into the kind of memory that doesn't need to be remembered to still be real. I didn't try to follow. I just stood there and smiled. I lingered by the fence for a while, unsure of what to do next. The orchard behind me had gone quiet again, so quiet that even my own breath felt too loud. The gap I'd entered through earlier was nowhere to be seen. In its place stood the solid wooden boards, patched and sealed with ivy clinging so thick that the fence looked as if it had never been disturbed. No hole, no broken slats, no rusted wheelbarrow wedged in like a makeshift gate. It was like the orchard had closed itself up the moment the dog disappeared. I reached out and pressed my palm against the ivy. The leaves were cool and smooth, and the wood behind them solid. No give, no hidden latches or loose boards. I was in every sense outside now, and somehow that felt right. The sunlight had shifted, Afternoon light, once soft and gold, now leaned toward evening. The alley I had come through earlier stretched before me, still damp and shadowed, still echoing the quiet sounds of a town winding down its day. I picked up my backpack from where I had left it and slung it over my shoulder. It felt heavier than I remembered, though maybe I had just changed while I was gone. As I started walking, I passed the faded posters on the walls again, peeling, torn, forgotten. But one of them caught my eye this time. It hadn't been visible before. A paper folded into quarters pinned beneath a newer glossy sign. I pulled it free. It was another drawing. This one was simpler, just pencil on scrap paper. But I knew the style. Same boy, same dog. No background this time. Just the two of them sitting side by side, the dog leaning against the boy's leg. At the bottom, in neat, shaky letters, someone had written, "If you ever find this place, say hello for me." I stared at it for a long while, then folded it gently and tucked it into my pocket. Back in the open street, the world was exactly as I'd left it. The same barber shop, its door shut tight. The same crooked pole with birds resting on the wires overhead. The sound of a vendor's bell echoed in the distance, someone selling sweet tofu or fried bananas. It all felt strangely unreal, like waking from a dream and realizing the world had gone on without you. I made it home just as the sun dipped behind the hills. My mother was in the kitchen humming an old song and chopping vegetables. She looked up as I entered and asked where I'd been. I told her I took the long way home, which was technically true. Dinner that night tasted like nothing I'd ever eaten before, though I couldn't explain why. The soup was the same, the rice soft, the pickled vegetables tangy like always. But it all carried a quiet sweetness, as if something of the orchard had followed me back. That night, lying in bed, I pulled out the drawings, carefully unfolded edges, still dusty from being carried in my shirt and pocket. I laid them side by side on the blanket, the girl with the ribbon, the boy with the dog, the shared sandwich under the guava tree. I stared at them for a long time. There were no dates, no names I could trace, no clues to anchor them to the world I knew. And yet, I felt like I had known these people, like I had been part of their story, even if only for an afternoon. I turned off the lamp and lay back in the dark. Outside my window, I heard a soft sound, not a bark, more like a sigh. I got up and peeked out. The street was empty. The wind was barely moving the trees. But for just a second, I thought I saw something slip past the hedge across the street. A low shape, a tail maybe. I didn't open the window. I didn't call out. Some things I have learned are meant to be left where they are quiet, half seen, folded into the corner of a forgotten orchard that no one remembers but never really vanishes. And sometimes, if you're lucky, they find you when you need them most. The next morning felt ordinary again, almost suspiciously so. The sun poured in through the curtains, lighting up the dust on my bookshelf and warming the wooden floorboards just like any other day. Birds chirped. A neighbor's radio played a tinny old tune. I sat at my desk, the drawings spread out before me. They looked more faded in the daylight, the colors gentler, like they were trying not to draw too much attention. But I could still feel the orchard in them, the weight of the trees, the softness of the air, the hush of a memory that didn't belong only to me. I stared at the last drawing for a long time, the one I'd found pinned behind the poster. "If you ever find this place, say hello for me." I whispered it aloud. Hello? Just in case. I should have gone out that day, played ball with the kids down the street or run errands for my mom. But something kept pulling me back to my desk. I found myself sketching without thinking, just lines at first, but they curved into trees, and the trees shaped into the hill. And before I knew it, I'd drawn the house again, the one with no door. It came out of me like it had always been there. After lunch, I tucked all the drawings into an old notebook and rode my bike into town. I didn't go back to the orchard, there was no way in now, and I didn't expect to find the dog waiting again. But I wanted to see something. I needed to know. I stopped by the oldest shop in the area, Mr. Lou's stationery and general store. He was almost 80 and had lived in the village his whole life. I figured if anyone would remember an orchard, it would be him. He was sitting behind the counter, counting stamps and sipping tea like always. "Mr. Lou," I said, setting my notebook on the counter. "Did there used to be an orchard near the old temple one, behind the back wall?" He looked up slowly, his brow furrowing beneath thick white eyebrows. "Orchard," he echoed, his voice a mix of surprise and memory. "Behind the temple." I nodded. "I think I found it. just for a little while." He stared at me. Then slowly he set his tea down and leaned forward. "Most of that land was sold off decades ago," he said. "Fenced in, overgrown. Folks stopped going near it after a while. Said it felt strange. Some kids used to sneak in, talked about drawings pinned to trees, a dog that led them around like a guide." He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Every few years someone claimed they saw the orchard again," he added. "But no one could ever show the way. Just stories, faded like chalk in the rain." I hesitated, then opened my notebook and showed him the drawings. He stared. His eyes went wide, not with fear, but with something softer. "Wonder maybe. I haven't seen this style in years," he murmured, tracing a wrinkled finger along the paper. "This looks like Mika's work. She lived down the road from here when I was a boy. Drew everything. Her dog was famous around here, always tied up with a blue cloth, like a little gentleman." "What happened to her?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. "She got sick," he said finally. "Moved away to the city with her family. We heard she didn't make it past her teens. The orchard was part of her family's land. After they left, no one touched it again." I felt something strange settle in my chest. Not sadness, not exactly. Just a quiet. Mr. Liu handed the drawing back to me carefully, like it might fall apart in his hands. "You saw something special," he said. "Don't chase it. Let it stay what it is." I nodded. On the ride home, the sky began to cloud over. Not in a heavy way, just enough to cast everything in silver and gray. The wind tugged at my sleeves and the trees rustled faintly, like they were whispering again. At home, I placed the drawings back inside the notebook and slipped it under my pillow. That night, as I drifted into sleep, I thought I heard the soft click-click of paws on wood, a sigh near the window, and the faintest rustle of fruit falling onto soft, dark soil. I didn't open my eyes. I just smiled, because some things are meant to be remembered in silence. A few days passed. I didn't speak much about the orchard, not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't seem like the kind of story that needed retelling. It felt complete the moment it happened, like a chapter that had written itself and gently closed its own cover. Still, I found myself doing small things differently. I walked slower on the way to school. I noticed the way light fell through tree leaves and how old bicycles leaned against fences like forgotten friends. I started carrying my sketchbook around, not to draw anything particular, but just in case my hand decided to remember something I hadn't noticed yet. The dog didn't return. I checked sometimes. After school, I'd glance toward the banyan tree where I'd first seen it. I even rode by the alley behind the barber shop once or twice, but it always looked ordinary, just a strip of shadow between two buildings, damp and quiet. But one morning a week after everything, I found something by my front gate, a single guava. Small, slightly bruised but fresh, not store-bought, still had a leaf on the stem. I looked up and down the street. No one. Just the mailman on his bicycle, far off in the distance. I picked up the guava and held it in my palm. It smelled just like the orchard. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I went to school and sat through math and history and lunch with that guava in my backpack, wrapped in a handkerchief like a secret. That evening, I peeled it slowly, letting the scent fill my room. I didn't eat it. I placed the slices in a small bowl beside the drawings on my desk. Just having it there made the air feel softer, like the orchard had reached out to tap me on the shoulder just once more. As weeks turned into months, life resumed its normal pace. New classes, new friends, a haircut I regretted, rainy days, birthday parties, quiet arguments, all the regular things that fit together into a childhood without asking. But sometimes on quieter evenings, I'd pull the notebook from under my bed and flip through the pages. The drawings hadn't faded. If anything, they looked clearer over time, like they had become sharper in their stillness. I added a few of my own, though I never tried to copy the original style. Mine were clumsier, more lines, less charm, but I didn't mind. I drew the guava tree, the house on the hill, the spoon wine chime, the round hut with its stone base and high window, and always the dog. The last drawing I ever added to that notebook was a picture of me sitting beside the dog at the orchard's edge, staring into a wide field of crooked trees. I didn't draw my face. I didn't need to. The dog was looking at me, tail curled, eyes calm. That was enough. Years later, I moved away. The notebook came with me, of course. tucked into the bottom of a suitcase between old clothes and folded memories. I didn't open it often, but when I did, the pages still smelled faintly of fruit and dust and something too old to name. And every now and then, once every few years, I'd return to the village. The temple still stood. The alley was still narrow and leaning, but the fence behind it had disappeared, replaced by a brick wall, neatly built. Too neat. No one remembered the orchard anymore, except me, and maybe the dog. I woke up just before dawn, not because of any loud sound, but because of the absence of everything else. No birds, no breeze. The room felt suspended in that soft moment between dreaming and daylight. And then I heard it, a whisper, not from my imagination, not from the hallway. It came from just beneath my window, gentle as breath, yet unmistakably calling my name. Not urgent, not eerie, just familiar. Like a friend placing a hand on your shoulder after years apart. I sat up. The sky outside was tinted a pale blue, the kind of light that only happens before the sun decides what kind of day it wants to be. I didn't bother with slippers. The wooden floor was cool under my feet, but I hardly noticed. Quietly, I padded to the window and pulled back the curtain. Our backyard was still there. The crooked tomato cages, the old white fence with peeling paint. But something was different. The tall grass just beyond the garden shimmered faintly in the morning haze, and I could have sworn it rippled as though someone had just passed through it. Then the whisper came again. Not louder, just clearer, like it didn't need to try anymore, like I was close enough to understand. I slipped on my sweater and opened the window. No flashlight, no shoes. Just me and this strange feeling in my chest, like I was about to remember something I hadn't thought of in years. The little back gate creaked the way it always did. I eased it open, careful not to let it snap shut. The grass was damp with dew brushing against my ankles. The air smelled like wild mint, and something faintly smoky like the after scent of a candle burned low in the night. I paused for a moment and listened. Nothing. No whisper. No wind. Just me, the faint glow of retreating stars and the tall grass ahead, standing still as breath. But I didn't turn back. I stepped forward past the wilting trellis over the forgotten stepping stones now swallowed by creeping vines. My footprints softened into the mist behind me. I wasn't entirely sure where I was going. I just knew I had to keep moving. There was something familiar waiting not in front of me, but somewhere deep in the stillness. Then I saw it, the field. The grass towered higher than I remembered, wild and waving, even though there wasn't the slightest breeze. This was the old backfield, the one behind the broken tool shed. Long ago, they said it was a sugarcane field. My grandfather used to talk about it as if it were a world of its own. But after the train stopped coming through, the land stopped being useful. The mill closed, the crops died off, no one returned. Oh, and the grass took over. Each year it grew taller, thicker, until everyone simply stopped mentioning it. People warned us not to go near too many ticks, too many snakes, but I always felt there was more to their hesitation. Even the birds avoided it. I stood there just at the edge of it, breathing in the stillness. No more whisper, no obvious trail, but I didn't need a trail. Somehow I already knew the way. I stepped into the tall grass. The moment I crossed that invisible line between our backyard and the field, the air changed. It grew thicker, quieter, like a blanket had been draped over the world. The grass parted gently around my legs, brushing against my knees as I walked deeper in. I didn't push it aside. It moved for me like it knew I was coming. Each step made the dew soak deeper into my skin, but I didn't mind. The hush that hung over the field was soft and complete. Not an oppressive silence, more like the kind that invites listening. The whisper didn't return, but I felt its presence. Like it had settled into the grass itself, folded into every stem and blade. It was guiding me without sound now. The deeper I went, the higher the grass rose. At some point it reached my waist, then my chest. I slowed down. My breath felt louder than before, and I started to notice other sounds, small ones. Clicks, rustles, shifting weight. Something or some things were moving out there too, somewhere just beyond my view. But they didn't feel threatening. They felt patient. I kept walking, following a rhythm I couldn't explain. It wasn't a path exactly, but the grass allowed me through, always just wide enough for a single step. And then I saw them. Shapes. First, just flickers at the corners of my eyes, like when you think someone's walking behind you but you turn and there's nothing. Then more clearly, the sway of movement not caused by wind, smooth low arcs between the grass stalks. Something was definitely there, too graceful to be birds, too silent to be people. My heart thudded quietly, not with fear but with alertness, that strange edge between caution and wonder. I stopped for a second, letting the stillness stretch again. The shapes vanished. The grass around me calmed. And then ahead of me, I saw a break, a dip in the land where the tall blades dropped suddenly. A hollow hidden just beyond the sugar cane that had gone wild and twisted over time. The air smelled richer there, like soil that had been turned recently. I pressed forward, pushing through the last curtain of grass, and emerged into the clearing. It was like stepping into a memory I didn't know I had. The space was perfectly round, ringed with dense grass and cane. The earth was darker, soft beneath my feet. No weeds, no stones, just a gentle slope that curved inward like a shallow bowl. At the center sat a bundle of something wrapped in a checkered cloth, old but still neatly tied. Beside it stood a lantern, off but clean, and just a few feet away, a small wooden post leaned slightly to one side, as if marking something no one else had noticed. And then I saw her. She was sitting on the far side of the hollow legs, tucked beneath her half in shadow. A girl about my age, maybe a little younger. Her hair was braided in a loose, simple way. She wore a shirt with faded stripes and carried a woven satchel that sat beside her like it had always belonged there. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched me. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came. I didn't feel like I was supposed to speak first, so I waited. After a moment, she tilted her head as if listening for something distant. Then she nodded, not to me, but to herself, and stood, still silent, still watching. She took 2 slow steps forward and reached into her satchel. From it, she pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it out to me. I crossed the clearing cautiously, not because I was afraid of her, but because I didn't want to break whatever strange, gentle thread was holding this moment together. When I reached her, I took the paper. It was warm from her hand. She didn't say a word, just gestured one small movement toward the earth beneath us. Then she turned and walked away, not toward the grass I'd come through, but into a darker patch behind the sugar cane. No hesitation, just a smooth, certain stride. She disappeared. I looked down at the folded paper. My hands were slightly trembling. I opened it slowly. There was a single sentence written in pencil. "You've been here before, just not in this life." The paper fluttered slightly in my hand. Around me, the hollow was still, but the wind had returned. It brushed against my back, pushing gently toward the spot where she'd pointed. And I suddenly knew I was standing above something. Not just earth, a memory, waiting to be remembered. I crouched down where she had pointed. The earth was soft, the soil damp and dark. I brushed away a thin layer of loose grass and felt my fingers graze something hard, flat with corners. I dug a little more carefully, loosening the dirt with my hands, until I unearthed a small wooden box the size of a lunch tin. It was worn smooth with age, its surface patterned with faint carvings that time had nearly erased. No lock, just a simple latch. I opened it slowly. Inside, resting atop a piece of folded cloth, were 2 objects: an old portable radio with cracked dials and a mirror no bigger than my palm. The radio's antenna was bent, and a thin spider web stretched from its edge to the corner of the box. The mirror's glass had fogged over its silver backing, peeling along the sides. It didn't make sense, but something about it felt inevitable, like I'd always known these things would be waiting for me here. I picked up the mirror first. It was cold, but not unpleasantly so. The surface was blurred, like trying to see your reflection through breath on a window. But when I tilted it just right, I saw something strange, faint lines that didn't match my face. Softer eyes, a different nose, a braid falling over one shoulder. I blinked. The image disappeared. Now it was just me again, my reflection, pale, curious, still kneeling in the grass. I set the mirror down gently and picked up the radio. It was heavier than it looked. I turned the dial. It crackled softly, then went quiet. I turned it again. More static, a low hum, a faint flicker of something just beyond hearing. Then from deep inside its dust-caked speaker, a voice emerged. Not a full sentence, just a whisper. My name. Twice. Soft, familiar, and this time unmistakably my own voice. I dropped the radio. It didn't break, just landed softly on the cloth and hummed once before falling silent. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I picked the radio up again and held it close. The speaker was warm now. Not hot, just warm, like a stone left in the sun. I closed my eyes. And then I remembered. Not a full memory, not in detail, but like stepping into a room you hadn't seen since you were small. I remembered walking through this same field years ago, maybe, or in a dream, or some place before I had this name, this body, this life. There was a girl always silent, and a dog, or maybe two, a red scarf in the wind, a music box tune played on a cracked radio, the mirror glinting on a rainy afternoon, and a whisper, always a whisper. But now I realized every time I'd heard it, even in childhood, even in dreams, it had always sounded a little like me. I had been calling myself back, calling myself here. I looked up at the hollow of the trees, ringing it in the sugarcane, arching overhead like a woven ceiling. No one else was around, but I felt no fear, no confusion, only stillness. A kind of calm that you only feel when two things that were meant to meet finally do. I stayed there for a while, the box in my lap, the mirror beside me, the radio cradled in my hand. The wind had picked up slightly now, swaying the grass gently. Somewhere far off, a bird sang a note and then fell silent again. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually, the radio went quiet again, not broken, just resting. I placed it back in the box, folded the cloth over it, and buried it once more. Not to hide it, but to let it sleep. Before I stood up, I picked up the mirror again and held it flat in my palm. This time, the reflection was perfectly clear. But it didn't show me. It showed the girl. Just her smile. Small, soft, a little sad. And then it was gone. Just me again. I placed the mirror back and stood brushing the earth from my legs. The grass whispered around me as I stepped out of the hollow. No path revealed itself, but I didn't need one. I walked toward the sound of birds, toward the edge of the field, and I swear I could hear someone walking just beside me in the grass, footsteps falling in time with mine, even though no one was there. By the time I reached the edge of the field, the sun was beginning to rise in earnest, casting long streaks of light across the tops of the grass. I hadn't realized how far I'd walked. The house was nowhere in sight, just the soft blue silhouette of the village off in the distance, and the faint silver thread of the railway cutting across the horizon. But I wasn't lost. Not exactly. I could feel the way back, not through landmarks or memory, but by the quiet rhythm of everything around me. It felt like the land was slowly guiding me, not pushing, just reminding me gently of the way home. I turned once to look behind me. The hollow was no longer visible, hidden once more beneath the folds of tall grass and wild sugarcane. No sign of the girl, no mark where I'd knelt in the soil. Just a field waving softly in the morning light like it had never been touched. But I knew better. I started walking again past a thicket of tall stalks with golden tips, past a patch of wild daisies growing in uneven clusters. The path, or what passed for one, curved in a slow arc until I came upon something unexpected. A fence, not a complete one, just two posts and a sagging rope between them, and behind it a wooden bench half swallowed by weeds and wild grass. There was a tin can resting on the seat filled with flat stones and seed husks. Someone had once sat here, maybe often. I brushed off a spot and sat. The bench creaked beneath me, not unpleasantly, but like it remembered being useful. I set my hands on my knees and closed my eyes. Just for a moment, and there it was again. The whisper, not behind me, not beside me, inside me. A low murmur rising from the quiet space beneath thoughts. It didn't say words this time, just a feeling, like a tide coming in. I saw flashes. The girl again, sitting with her satchel at her side, drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. The mirror in her hand tilted toward the sky. The same old radio resting on a wooden step, playing a soft static rhythm like rain on a roof. Then a train, rusted, slow-moving, passing through the field like it had been lost for years, and finally found the tracks again. No conductor, no noise, just a long, low breath as it rumbled by in silence. When I opened my eyes, everything was still. The grass, the sky, the bench. But something inside me had shifted. Like a door I didn't know existed had been cracked open just enough to let in a thread of light. I stood, Walked around the bench, and there in the dirt, mostly hidden by leaves, was something small and red. A ribbon, old, slightly frayed, but tied in a neat little bow. I bent down and picked it up. It was warm from the sun. As I turned it in my hand, I realized it looked exactly like the one the girl had worn in the reflection, just peeking out from her braid in the mirror. I slipped it into my pocket, not to keep, just to carry for a little while. The path began to slope downward, the grass thinning, the space between trees widening. I followed it, my footsteps quiet now, as if I'd learned how to walk in this place without disturbing it. At the bottom of the slope, the train tracks appeared, rusty, overgrown, forgotten. No train in sight now, just the tracks curving through the trees like an old story still waiting to be told. I stepped onto the rails and walked along them, balancing with arms slightly out. The metal was cool beneath my feet. Each step felt lighter than the last. I didn't know exactly where the tracks would lead, but I didn't care. Something told me they knew. The tracks curved gently the way old things do when they've had time to soften. Vines crept between the wooden ties, and tiny flowers had taken root where rust used to live. It didn't feel like a place abandoned. It felt like a place remembered. As I walked, the morning light filtered through the trees in streaks, casting patterns on the ground that shifted with every breeze. Each step brought me deeper into something I couldn't quite name, a feeling of return, even though I had no map, no destination, no reason to be here. About 10 minutes down the line, I came upon a clearing where the trees stepped politely back, and the tracks widened into a split, forming a Y. One path curled toward the forest, the other disappeared into tall reeds near a pond I didn't know existed. And there at the center stood a tree. An old willow bent low, with age, its branches sweeping the ground like long fingers brushing across forgotten words. Beneath it sat a wooden crate turned on its side like a seat, and beside it, tucked in the roots, was a rusted lantern. The girl was there again. She was facing away this time, drawing circles in the dirt with a stick. The same woven satchel rested on her hip, and her head tilted gently like she was listening to something far off. The sight of her didn't surprise me. It felt natural, like we'd agreed to meet here long before I knew it. I approached slowly. When I reached the willow, she looked up, not startled, not smiling either. Just calm. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I noticed how old they looked. Not tired, just aware, like they had watched this scene unfold before. She reached into her satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, a small flat bundle. She offered it without a word. I sat across from her and unfolded it carefully. Inside was a photograph, black and white edges, curled from age. It showed a boy and a girl, both barefoot, sitting on these very tracks. The girl wore a ribbon in her hair. The boy held a radio between his knees, and behind them, just barely visible in the blur of trees, was the outline of the same willow tree. They looked happy, at peace, but I couldn't say who they were. I looked up at the girl in front of me, then back at the photo. She nodded once slowly. It wasn't confirmation, it was permission. I held the photo close and felt the warmth of the morning sun wrap around my shoulders like a quiet blanket. And then as suddenly as she had appeared, she stood. No words. She stepped away from the willow and began walking toward the fork in the tracks, taking the path that led toward the reeds in the hidden pond. She didn't look back. I rose instinctively, ready to follow, but my legs didn't move. Something told me I wasn't meant to go with her this time, that this was her part of the journey, and I was meant to stay. She reached the bend in the track, disappeared behind the tall reeds, and the space she'd left behind filled with sunlight and silence. I sat down on the crate, still holding the photo. The lantern beside me, long extinguished, now cast a faint glow from the inside, just the smallest flicker, like a firefly resting at its base. It pulsed softly in time with my breathing. I placed the photo inside the satchel and held it in my lap, unsure if I was keeping it for her or for myself. A breeze passed through the clearing. The willow branches swayed gently, their tips brushing the ground like pages turning in a story already told. The tracks hummed faintly beneath me, and I understood something. The whisper had never been a call from someone else. It had been an echo of footsteps already taken, of memories not yet lived, of pieces of myself scattered like seeds, waiting to be found in places I didn't know I'd been. I sat there a long time, letting the quiet settle around me, letting the world grow still again. Eventually, I stood up. The satchel felt light in my hands, though it held the photograph, and something else now, something I hadn't noticed before. Tucked into a small side pocket was a folded square of paper, yellowed and soft at the edges, like it had been read many times. I sat down again beneath the willow, my back against the rough bark, and gently unfolded it. It wasn't a letter, not exactly. Just a few lines written in small, looping handwriting. Sometimes we walk the same path twice. Once as who we are, and once as who we forgot we used to be. Below the words, someone had drawn a map, not a precise one, but more like a memory of one. A curved track, a pond shaped like a teardrop, a willow drawn with a simple line of ink. And off to one side, shaded faintly in blue, was a small mark labeled Echo. I stared at that word for a long time. Echo. Was that what I'd been following all this time? Not a ghost, not a voice, but a part of myself bouncing back through time and place, waiting to be heard again. The idea felt comforting, like I wasn't chasing something unknown, but remembering something true. I tucked the paper back into the satchel and stood brushing leaves from my sweater. The sun was high now, casting golden beams that danced across the forest floor. The wind had shifted, warmer, more awake. I turned toward the way I'd come, back along the tracks past the split through the curving trees. My steps felt familiar now, not just retracing, but connecting. And then just as I crossed a patch of dappled shadow, I saw it. The dog. Same patchy fur, same blue cloth tied around its neck. It stood just ahead on the tracks, half in sunlight, half in shade, watching me, with soft eyes that didn't blink. I stopped. We looked at each other for what felt like a full minute. Then it turned and walked slowly along the rail, and I followed. It didn't look back to check on me. It didn't need to. I was meant to follow. We passed old mile markers, a rusted cart tilted into the grass, and a scattering of white feathers along the edge of the trail. The trees began to thin. And then just beyond a bend, the clearing opened, and there was the field again. The one with the tall grass. The one I had entered when this all began. But now it didn't feel wild or overgrown. It felt like a threshold, like a doorway. The dog stopped at the edge and looked over its shoulder at me. Then it stepped into the grass. I walked in after it. This time the grass didn't just part, it welcomed me. Each stalk leaning gently aside as if brushing against me in greeting. The sunlight filtered through in long golden strands, and I could hear the sound of my own breath sinking with the wind. We walked for a long time, not in circles, not toward anywhere I recognized, but I didn't feel lost. Eventually we reached a small hill rising out of the center of the field. It wasn't steep, just enough to lift us above the sea of grass. At the top, the dog sat down and looked out. I sat beside it. From up here I could see everything. The forest, the pond, the curving tracks, even the distant rooftops of home touched now by the sleepy glow of late morning. And in the distance, barely visible, but somehow clear, I saw the girl standing at the far edge of the field, her satchel on her shoulder, her braids swaying in the breeze. She raised one hand, not waving, just holding it up in a still, quiet gesture. I lifted my hand in return. She turned and walked into the grass. The dog sighed beside me, and I closed my eyes, not to sleep, just to remember. I don't know how long I stayed on that hill. Time didn't behave normally in the tall grass. It moved like water, slow in some places, fast in others, swirling quietly around the edges of thought. I sat with my eyes closed, listening to the wind curl through the stalks, feeling the earth steady beneath me. The dog had lain down beside me, chin resting on its paws, breathing soft and steady. It didn't seem in a hurry to leave, and neither was I. Up here above the murmuring grass, everything felt balanced, whole, like nothing needed fixing because nothing had been broken to begin with. When I finally opened my eyes, the sun had shifted again lower now, casting long shadows from the hilltop. I stood slowly, careful not to disturb the silence too much. The dog rose to stretch its front legs long and gave a single soft huff. I thought it would walk with me, but it didn't. It just looked at me, eyes gentle and full of something I couldn't name. And then it turned and padded down the opposite side of the hill, back into the grass, back toward the heart of whatever this place truly was. I watched until his tail disappeared into gold and green, then turned the other way and began walking home. This time I didn't need to guess the way. The grass seemed thinner now, parting easily for my steps. Birds called overhead. Crickets stirred in the shadows. The sky warmed into a dusty blue and every sound felt like a thread guiding me gently back. I reached the fence at the edge of our garden just as the sun began to dip behind the trees. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, and for a moment I paused there looking back at the field. It was still, quiet, but not empty. Even without the girl, even without the dog, something remained, not waiting, just being. Inside the house, everything was just as I left it. The back door open, my sweater draped over a chair, a cup of water half full on my desk still cool to the touch. As if I'd only been gone for an hour, I placed the satchel carefully on the bed. When I opened it, the photo was still there. The boy and the girl, sitting on the tracks, smiling faintly at a world that no longer existed, but maybe hadn't completely vanished either. I ran a finger over the image, and for a second I thought I saw the girl blink. Just once, just a flicker. But when I looked again, the picture was still, perfectly still. That night, I didn't sleep right away. I sat by the window with the ribbon beside me, the breeze carrying the scent of mint and warm earth through the screen. Somewhere not far, I heard the faint chirp of frogs and the slow trill of cicadas beginning their song. I watched the field under the stars. It shimmered in the moonlight just barely, like it was breathing. And I knew even if I never walked that path again, even if the dog never returned, even if the girl had vanished into the tall grass, for good I hadn't lost anything. Because some places once found don't need to be visited again to remain part of you. They settle quietly and wait for your footsteps in dreams. The next morning the world felt quieter than usual. Not in the way of absence, but in the way a room feels just after someone you love has left warmth still lingering in the cushions, a scent in the air as though their presence hasn't quite caught up to their departure. I woke early again, not because of a whisper this time, but out of habit like my body remembered before my mind did. I sat at the edge of my bed, the soft light of dawn stretching across the floor, and let the silence settle. The satchel was still on my desk. I opened it slowly, half expecting the photograph to have changed again, but it was the same two figures, the same quiet happiness. But there was something softer about it now, less like a picture, more like a window. I folded it back into the cloth and left it where it was. Later that day, I walked down to the old tool shed. The backfield was still overgrown, but now I noticed the narrow parting in the grass, subtle, almost hidden. I didn't go in, not because I was afraid, but because I knew the time for that journey had passed. The field was resting now, the path dimmed, and I respected that. Instead, I walked the perimeter, tracing its borders, slowly feeling its presence hum against the air. The birds had returned. The wind moved in smooth arcs through the leaves. It was no longer a place of mystery, but of memory. When I returned home, I opened the mirror again. This time, there was nothing strange in the reflection. Just me, exactly as I am. And yet, I looked a little different. Calmer, maybe. More present. Like I had stepped into myself a little more fully. I tucked it away. At school, I barely mentioned anything. What would I have said that I'd followed a whisper through the tall grass and found an old version of myself waiting in the quiet? That a dog with a blue cloth had shown me the shape of echoes? No, some stories don't need retelling. They just need holding. In the weeks that followed, I found myself walking more, listening more, sitting quietly in places I used to overlook. The edge of the railway, the hollow behind the vegetable garden, the porch steps just before nightfall. I didn't see the girl again, or the dog, but I didn't need to, because now when I passed the field or looked at the trees, I didn't feel like I was searching. I felt like I was being watched over. One evening, I found something in my jacket pocket that I hadn't remembered putting there, a small round pebble, smooth and pale. I didn't recognize it at first until I remembered the tin can by the bench under the willow. One of the stones from long ago, or maybe not so long ago. I smiled and left it on my windowsill where it could catch the light every morning, just to remind me that some echoes come back not as sound, but as stillness. The field hasn't changed much. The grass still sways when the wind passes through, and at certain hours just before dusk or just after rain, it catches the light in a way that makes the world feel paused, as if everything is holding its breath. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I sit by the window and watch for that shimmer. I don't expect anything to happen, not anymore. But every so often, I think I see something move just beyond the far edge, a low shape, gentle and slow, or a shadow where none should be. And when I blink, it's gone. But the feeling stays, that I'm not alone, that something once forgotten is still out there, quietly watching over its part of the world. And I don't need to go back, because part of me never left. The hollow beneath the sugar cane, the silent girl with the braid, the radio that whispered my name, the dog with the blue cloth collar. They live in the quiet now, wrapped in grass and memory and soft earth. And when I close my eyes, I can still hear it, the faint hum of that whisper, not outside me anymore, but somewhere deep inside. No louder than a breath, no clearer than a thought, just enough to remind me I was always meant to find that place, and it somehow was always waiting to find me. End of script. Sweet dreams.